Why people protest. The psychology of dissent. Level C. 1. Advance. Throughout history, the image of a crowd marching through the streets, holding signs high and chanting in unison, has symbolized one of humanity's most powerful forces: protest. From civil rights movements to environmental marches, from labor strikes to digital activism, protests have shaped laws, overthrown governments, and changed the course of nations. But what truly drives people to protest? Why do some individuals risk their safety, comfort, and reputation for a cause, while others choose silence? At its core, protest is a response to a deep emotional and moral imbalance. People protest when they feel unheard, when institutions fail to represent their interests, and when collective frustration reaches a breaking point. The decision to take action, however, is rarely impulsive. It grows from a mix of personal conviction, social influence, and moral reasoning. Psychologists describe three major emotional triggers behind protest movements: anger, hope, and solidarity. Anger acts as the initial spark the moment people recognize injustice and refuse to accept it. Hope gives that anger direction, transforming emotion into organized effort. Solidarity, finally, sustains the movement, the feeling that we are in this together, that individual voices combine into something larger and more powerful. Take, for instance, the civil rights movement of the 1,960 seconds in the United States. Anger alone could have burned out quickly, leading to chaos. But it was the shared hope for equality and the unity among diverse groups that transformed rage into one of the most successful social movements of the 20th century. Similarly, in more recent times, global climate protests have drawn millions of young people not only because of fear and anger, but because they believe collective action still has the power to change the future. The role of perceived efficacy. Research in political psychology shows that people are more likely to join protests when they believe their actions can make a difference, a concept known as perceived efficacy. When individuals feel powerless, they often retreat into cynicism or apathy. But when a movement demonstrates visible results, policy changes, media coverage, or growing public support, participation surges. That's why protest organizers carefully design events to show impact, large numbers, powerful visuals, and strong messaging. These create what sociologists call emotional contagion, a shared sense of purpose and empowerment that spreads quickly through crowds and online communities. The social nature of protest. No protest exists in isolation. Social networks, both physical and digital, play a crucial role in mobilization. A single post or video can ignite a chain reaction, transforming individual frustration into global action. Online platforms have made it easier than ever to organize demonstrations, spread information, and challenge authority. However, this same accessibility can also create clicktivism, a phenomenon where people express support online but rarely take real-world action. While digital engagement raises awareness, social change still requires physical presence, collective endurance, and strategic coordination. Still, protests in the digital age have achieved remarkable influence. From the Arab Spring to global women's marches, online organization has allowed movements to bypass traditional media filters, giving ordinary people the power to set the public agenda. The personal cost of dissent. Protesting isn't just about shouting slogans or holding signs. For many, it involves real risk, from arrest and injury to job loss and social backlash. So why do people still do it? Social psychologists point to the concept of moral identity, the idea that people act in line with their values even when it costs them personally. Those who strongly identify with a cause see participation as a moral duty, not a choice. For them, silence would feel like betrayal. Throughout history, countless individuals have demonstrated this courage. Think of the suffragettes, who were imprisoned for demanding the right to vote, or the Polish workers who risked their lives during the Solidarity movement. Their sacrifices weren't acts of recklessness, they were expressions of deeply held moral principles. The collective consciousness. When individuals join a protest, something transformative happens. Personal fears fade, replaced by a sense of belonging and empowerment. This phenomenon, known as collective effervescence, creates an emotional connection that transcends individuality. Marching shoulder to shoulder, people experience a profound feeling of unity, as if their heartbeat synchronizes with thousands of others. Sociologist Emil Durkheim first described this concept while studying religious rituals, but it applies equally to modern protests. The shared rhythm of chants, drums, and voices produces a temporary sense of transcendence, a powerful reminder that humans are not just isolated beings, but social creatures bound by shared purpose. Governments and the paradox of power. Interestingly, protests can strengthen democracies as much as they challenge them. Peaceful dissent acts as a safety valve, allowing citizens to express discontent before frustration turns into violence or revolution. In healthy societies, governments see protests not as threats but as feedback. However, in authoritarian systems, protest is often suppressed precisely because it exposes cracks in the illusion of total control. The more power tries to silence dissent, the more courage it takes to speak, and the more symbolic each act of defiance becomes. Whether through massive marches or quiet gestures of resistance, protests remain one of the most visible expressions of freedom. They remind those in power that legitimacy comes from consent, and that silence is never the same as agreement. While the 20th century saw organized marches, banners, and speeches, the 21st has introduced a new kind of protest, one that often begins not on the streets, but on screens. Hashtags, viral videos, and digital campaigns have redefined how movements grow, spread, and succeed. Social media has transformed the protest landscape in ways both inspiring and troubling, giving rise to what many now call #activism. The rise of digital movements. When a video of injustice goes viral, it can trigger a global response in a matter of hours. The Me Too movement, for example, began as a personal campaign to give voice to survivors of sexual harassment. Within months, it had become a global symbol of resistance and empowerment, sparking policy changes in workplaces, film industries, and governments worldwide. Similarly, Black Lives Matter began as a simple phrase of outrage and solidarity, yet it grew into one of the most influential social movements of the century, calling attention to systemic racism and police brutality. The power of digital movements lies in accessibility. You don't need to attend a rally or face tear gas to take part. You can amplify voices, share information, or donate to causes from your phone. For many, especially those living in repressive societies, online activism is the only safe outlet for dissent. However, there's also a darker side to this digital awakening. Online spaces can become echo chambers, spreading misinformation as quickly as truth. Hashtag campaigns sometimes fade as fast as they rise, leaving behind little lasting change. Some critics argue that social media creates the illusion of action, that liking, sharing, or posting can replace real engagement. This phenomenon, often called slacktivism, challenges us to ask whether awareness alone is enough. When peaceful turns to violent. Most people associate protests with peaceful gatherings, marches, sit-ins, or candlelight vigils. Yet not all protests remain calm. History has shown that under pressure, frustration can boil over. When people feel unheard, ignored, or attacked, peaceful resistance may transform into chaos. The line between protest and riot can blur within moments. This shift is not always spontaneous. Sometimes provocations, police aggression, or infiltration by extremists ignite violence. Social psychologists explain that in highly emotional environments, group identity strengthens while individual control weakens. This phenomenon, known as de-individuation, helps explain why crowds sometimes act in ways that individuals never would alone. But it would be simplistic to dismiss violent uprisings as mere loss of control. In some cases, they reflect a deep structural anger, a belief that peaceful means have failed. From the French Revolution to the Arab Spring, history reveals that when pressure builds too long without relief, explosions are inevitable. Still, most experts agree that sustainable change rarely grows out of destruction. Violence may draw attention, but peace builds legitimacy. The psychology of protest. Why do some people risk everything for change while others stay silent? Psychology offers a few clues. One key factor is moral conviction, a deeply held belief that something is fundamentally right or wrong. When people feel morally obligated to act, they often overcome fear, apathy, or social pressure. Another element is collective identity, the sense of belonging to something larger than oneself. Protesters often describe feeling united, powerful, and finally heard. This collective emotion can be transformative. It's not just about politics, it's about meaning. Marching beside others who share your values creates a psychological bond that strengthens courage and resilience. Yet not everyone responds to injustice in the same way. Research shows that perceived efficacy, the belief that your actions can make a difference, plays a major role. If people feel that protest leads to change, they're more likely to join. If they believe the system is unchangeable, frustration turns into silence or cynicism. That's why even small victories, a law rewritten, a resignation, a promise of reform matter so much. They remind society that protest works. Cultural differences in protest. Not all societies view protest through the same lens. In democratic nations, protests are often seen as a healthy part of civic life, a way for citizens to influence policy. In authoritarian states, however, public dissent is often criminalized. Fear of punishment suppresses participation, forcing activists underground or online. Cultural values also shape protest styles. In some East Asian societies, where social harmony is highly valued, demonstrations tend to be quieter, symbolic, and highly organized. In contrast, Western cultures often celebrate direct confrontation as a sign of authenticity and passion. Neither approach is inherently better. They simply reflect different traditions of expression and authority. When protest becomes a way of life, for many activists, protest isn't just an event, it's a lifestyle. Some dedicate their entire careers to advocacy, human rights, or environmental causes. But long-term activism comes with emotional costs. Burnout, anxiety, and disillusionment are common. When change is slow, hope can fade. The constant fight against injustice can feel endless. To sustain themselves, experienced activists often speak of hope as discipline. It's not about blind optimism, but about choosing to keep working even when results seem invisible. The idea, popularized by writer Mariame Kaba, reminds us that hope is not a mood, but a practice, a steady commitment to the future we want to build. Governments and the protest dilemma. From a government's perspective, protests present a paradox. On one hand, they challenge authority and disrupt public order. On the other, they act as a safety valve for democracy, a pressure release that keeps systems flexible. When citizens can protest freely, they are less likely to resort to violence or revolution. Wise governments therefore tolerate, even respect, peaceful protest. They recognize it as a sign of engagement, not rebellion. Repressive regimes, by contrast, often fear protest because it exposes their fragility. The harsher their response, the more they reveal their insecurity. In this sense, the treatment of protesters becomes a test of a nation's moral maturity. Technology and surveillance. Technology has empowered protesters, but it has also empowered those in power. Governments now use sophisticated tools to monitor dissent, facial recognition, social media tracking, and data analysis. Drones and AI systems can identify leaders, predict crowd movements, or block communication networks. Yet technology cuts both ways. Protesters adapt quickly, using VPNs, mesh networks, or encrypted messaging apps to organize safely. They share live updates, document abuses, and appeal to the international community in real time. The struggle between freedom and control has become a digital arms race, one that will define the future of activism. The aftermath of protest. Every protest ends, but what happens next? Some fade quietly, others reshape history. The difference often depends on what follows the noise. Sustainable change requires negotiation, policy reform, and long-term strategy. Movements that fail to transform energy into structure risk dissolving once emotions fade. For example, the Arab Spring showed both the potential and the peril of sudden uprisings. While it toppled dictators, it also left political vacuums that were filled by new forms of repression. The lesson is clear. Revolutions must evolve into governance, or they will collapse under their own weight. Still, not all victories are visible. Some are cultural shifts in awareness, language, or values. The normalization of discussions about gender equality, mental health, and racial justice, for instance, owes much to years of persistent activism. Change often begins with conversation, and protest is conversation made visible. Protest in the age of climate crisis. In recent years, one of the most urgent global movements has been the fight for climate action. From Greta Thunberg's school strikes to mass demonstrations across Europe and Asia, young people are demanding accountability from leaders. Unlike previous protests, these movements are not about local injustices but about the planet's survival. The climate crisis unites generations, classes, and nations. It's not a distant issue, it's personal. Floods, fires, and heat waves make the consequences impossible to ignore. For many, climate protest is not optional but existential. The message is simple. Without action, there will be no future to fight for. The future of protest. What will protest look like in the decades to come. Artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and digital surveillance will all play roles we can barely predict. Imagine virtual marches in metaverse spaces, or decentralized global campaigns run by AI moderators to ensure fairness and inclusivity. While the tools may change, the spirit will not. At its core, protest is about dignity, the belief that people deserve to be heard. As long as there is injustice, inequality, or oppression, there will be those who stand up, speak out, and demand better. The forms may evolve, but the impulse remains timeless. Protest is both ancient and new, a song humanity keeps singing, in every language, under every sky.